Maria Santos wiped down the same counter for the third time that evening, her weathered hands moving in the automatic rhythm of someone who had been running a restaurant for 23 years. The fluorescent light above flickered intermittently, casting uneven shadows across the worn linoleum floor of Santos' family diner. She kept meaning to replace it, but the repair fund had been empty for months, just like most nights when closing time arrived with barely enough customers to cover the day's expenses. The small diner sat on the outskirts of Riverside, California, in a part of town that had seen better days. Once a thriving stop for truckers and travelers heading toward the desert, the area had been bypassed by newer highways and faster routes. Maria's customer base had dwindled to a handful of regulars, mostly elderly locals who appreciated her authentic Mexican-American cooking and the fact that she never rushed them through their meals. Tonight had been particularly slow. The dinner rush, if it could be called that, had consisted of old Mr. Peterson ordering his usual coffee and pie, and a young couple who had split a single plate of enchiladas while counting change from their pockets. Maria understood their situation all too well. She had been in their shoes many times, stretching every dollar to make ends meet while trying to maintain dignity and hope. The kitchen held the remnants of the day's cooking: a pot of rice that hadn't been touched, beans that were still warm, and several portions of carne asada that she had prepared optimistically for a dinner crowd that never materialized. In the past, she might have taken the leftovers home to her small apartment, but lately, even her own appetite had diminished under the weight of mounting bills and uncertain futures. As she prepared to close for the night, Maria said a small prayer, as she did every evening, asking for the strength to keep going and for tomorrow to bring enough customers to keep the lights on for another day. The rumble of motorcycle engines cut through the quiet evening air like thunder rolling across the desert. Maria looked up from her cleaning, her heart skipping slightly as the sound grew louder and closer. Through the large front windows of the diner, she could see headlights approaching. Not the single beam of a car, but multiple lights moving in formation. 12 motorcycles pulled into the small parking lot, their chrome exhaust pipes gleaming under the diner's neon sign. The riders dismounted with the fluid movements of people who had spent countless hours on the road. Even through the glass, Maria could see they were a formidable group. Leather jackets, denim, boots, and the unmistakable bearing of men who lived by their own code. Maria's first instinct was fear. She had heard stories about motorcycle clubs, seen movies that painted them as dangerous outlaws. Her hand moved instinctively toward the phone, ready to call for help if needed. But as she watched them through the window, something gave her pause. They weren't acting aggressively or destructively. Instead, they seemed tired, road-weary, and genuinely hungry. The apparent leader of the group, a tall man with graying hair and intricate tattoos covering his arms, approached the door first. He tested the handle gently, found it unlocked, and stepped inside with a respectful nod toward Maria. His voice, when he spoke, was surprisingly soft and polite. "Evening, ma'am. I know it's late, and I can see you're closing up. We've been riding for about 10 hours straight, and we were hoping you might still be serving food." The other bikers filed in behind him, removing their helmets and gloves with practiced efficiency. Despite their intimidating appearance, they waited quietly for Maria's response, showing a level of respect that surprised her. She realized that her assumptions about them might have been wrong, and her natural compassion began to override her initial fear. Maria studied the faces of the 12 men standing in her diner, and what she saw there wasn't menace or threat. It was exhaustion, hunger, and the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from long hours on the road. Several of them had the lean look of people who hadn't eaten a proper meal in too long, and their polite demeanor suggested they were genuinely hoping for help rather than looking for trouble. The leader, who had introduced himself simply as Jake, explained their situation with honest directness. They were part of a motorcycle club that organized charity rides, and they had been traveling from Los Angeles to Phoenix to deliver donations to a children's hospital. The trip had taken longer than expected due to mechanical problems and weather delays, and most of the restaurants along their route had already closed for the night. "We can pay," Jake assured her, pulling out a worn wallet. "We're not looking for charity. We just need some food to get us through the night." even if it's just coffee and whatever you might have left over." Maria looked at the cash in Jake's hand, then at the hopeful faces of the other bikers. She thought about the pot of rice in the kitchen, the beans that were still warm, the carne asada that would otherwise go to waste. She thought about her own struggles, her empty cash register, and the bills that were due at the end of the week. But she also thought about her grandmother's words, spoken in Spanish decades ago. Cuando alimentas a otros, alimentas tu propia alma. When you feed others, you feed your own soul. Her grandmother had lived through the Depression, had known real hunger, and had never turned away anyone who came to her door asking for food. The decision, when it came, felt as natural as breathing. Maria smiled for the first time that evening and gestured toward the empty tables. "Sit down," she said simply. "Let me see what I can put together for you." Maria moved through her kitchen with renewed energy, transforming the day's leftovers into a feast through sheer force of will and culinary skill. The rice that had sat untouched became the foundation for a hearty meal, seasoned with fresh cilantro and lime. The beans were reheated with additional spices, their aroma filling the small kitchen with warmth and comfort. The carne asada, still tender and flavorful, was quickly diced and prepared for serving. She worked with the efficiency of someone who had fed families on limited resources for most of her life. Tortillas were warmed on the griddle. Fresh salsa was prepared from tomatoes and peppers that had been destined for tomorrow's prep work, and a large pot of coffee began brewing to help the tired riders stay alert for the remainder of their journey. The bikers waited patiently in the dining area, their conversation quiet and respectful. Maria could hear them talking about their charity work, their families, and the long road ahead. These weren't the dangerous outlaws she had initially imagined. They were working men who had chosen to spend their weekend helping children in need, and who had ended up hungry and tired as a result of their generosity. As she cooked, Maria found herself thinking about the irony of the situation. Here she was, struggling to keep her own business afloat, preparing to feed a group of strangers who could easily afford to eat anywhere they chose. But something about their respectful demeanor and their charitable mission had touched her heart in a way that made the financial considerations seem secondary. When the food was ready, Maria loaded it onto plates with the same care she would have shown to paying customers. She added extra portions, knowing that men who had been riding motorcycles for 10 hours would need substantial nourishment. The presentation might not have been fancy, but it was made with love and genuine concern for their well-being. The reaction of the bikers to Maria's cooking was immediate and heartfelt. As she set the plates before them, she watched their faces light up with genuine appreciation and surprise. The food was simple but expertly prepared, seasoned with the kind of authentic flavors that could only come from years of experience and cultural heritage. Jake took the first bite and closed his eyes, savoring the taste. When he opened them, there was something approaching reverence in his expression. He had eaten in countless restaurants during his years on the road, but there was something special about this meal, not just the quality of the cooking, but the spirit in which it was offered. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is incredible. You didn't have to do this for us, especially this late, especially when you were closing up." The other bikers echoed his sentiments, their appreciation evident in every word and gesture. They ate with the focused intensity of truly hungry men, but they also took time to compliment Maria on her cooking and to share stories about their own families and backgrounds. What had started as a simple transaction was becoming something more meaningful, a connection between strangers based on mutual respect and human kindness. As the meal progressed, Maria learned more about her unexpected guests. They were members of a motorcycle club that dedicated significant time and resources to charitable causes. The Phoenix trip was just one of many they organized throughout the year, delivering everything from toys to medical supplies to communities in need. Several of them were veterans, others were skilled tradesmen, and all of them had chosen to spend their free time helping others rather than pursuing personal pleasures. When the last plate was cleared, Jake approached Maria with his wallet again, but she could see in his eyes that this had become about more than just paying for a meal. Jake counted out bills from his wallet, but instead of the modest amount that the simple meal might have cost, he placed nearly $200 on the counter. When Maria protested that it was too much, He shook his head with quiet determination. "You fed 12 hungry men when you could have turned us away," he said. "You used your own ingredients, your own time, your own kindness. That's worth more than money, but money is what we have to offer right now." The other bikers had gathered around, and Maria realized they were each contributing to the payment. Bills appeared from various pockets, 20s, 10s, 5s, until there was more cash on her counter than she typically saw in a week of regular business. The generosity was overwhelming, but it was the spirit behind it that truly moved her. "We know what it's like to struggle," one of the other bikers, a man named Carlos, explained. "We can see that you're working hard to keep this place going. You didn't have to help us, but you did. That means something." Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes as she looked at the money on the counter. It was enough to pay her overdue electric bill, to restock her kitchen, to keep the diner running for another month. But more than the financial relief, it was the recognition of her kindness that touched her heart. These men understood the sacrifice she had made, and they were honoring it in the most practical way they could. As the bikers prepared to leave, Jake handed Maria a business card with his contact information. "If you ever need anything," he said, "if this place ever gets in real trouble, you call me. We take care of people who take care of others." The promise felt genuine and substantial, backed by the kind of brotherhood that Maria had only heard about but never experienced firsthand. As the motorcycles roared to life outside, she stood in her empty diner, surrounded by the evidence of an extraordinary evening that had changed her perspective on both her business and her faith in human nature. The story of Maria's kindness spread through the motorcycle community with the speed and efficiency of a well-oiled communication network. Jake's club had connections throughout Southern California and beyond, and the tale of the small diner owner who had fed 12 hungry bikers with leftovers and refused to accept full payment resonated deeply within a community that valued loyalty, generosity, and respect for those who showed kindness to strangers. By the time Jake and his crew reached Phoenix the next morning, the story had already traveled hundreds of miles through phone calls, text messages, and social media posts. Motorcycle clubs operated on principles of brotherhood and mutual support, and Maria's gesture had marked her as someone deserving of the community's protection and patronage. The story took on additional layers as it spread. Details about Maria's struggling diner, her obvious financial difficulties, and her willingness to share what little she had with strangers struck a chord with bikers who understood hardship and appreciated authentic generosity. Many of them had their own stories of small business owners, waitresses, and cooks who had shown them kindness when others had judged them based on their appearance. Within hours, motorcycle clubs from across the region were making plans to visit Santos' family diner. It wasn't organized by any central authority. It was a spontaneous outpouring of gratitude and support from a community that believed in taking care of those who took care of others. The word spread from Los Angeles to San Diego, from Phoenix to Las Vegas, carrying with it the promise that Maria's kindness would not be forgotten. Some clubs planned to make the trip that very weekend, while others scheduled visits for the following weeks. The common thread was a desire to show Maria that her generosity had been noticed and appreciated by people who understood the value of authentic human kindness in a world that often seemed to have forgotten such virtues. Maria arrived at her diner the next morning at 6 o'clock, as she had every day for the past 23 years. The routine was so ingrained that she could perform it half asleep, unlock the door, turn on the lights, start the coffee, begin prep work for the day ahead. But as she turned the corner onto her street, she stopped dead in her tracks, unable to process what she was seeing. Motorcycles lined both sides of the street as far as she could see. Chrome gleamed in the early morning sunlight. Leather seats and saddlebags created a sea of black and brown, and the distinctive shapes of Harley-Davidsons, Indians, and custom bikes filled every available parking space. There had to be at least 100 motorcycles, maybe more, all arranged with the precision and respect that characterized the motorcycle community. The bikers themselves stood in small groups, talking quietly and drinking coffee from travel mugs. They had clearly been there for some time, waiting patiently for the diner to open. As Maria approached, still stunned by the sight, they began to notice her arrival. Conversations stopped. and dozens of faces turned toward her with expressions of respect and anticipation. Jake stepped forward from the crowd, his face breaking into a warm smile as he saw Maria's shocked expression. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet morning air. "Hope you don't mind, but word got around about last night. Seems like a lot of folks wanted to come by and try your cooking." Maria looked at the sea of motorcycles, at the dozens of leather-clad men and women who had traveled from who knows where just to visit her small diner, and felt her knees go weak. The financial implications alone were staggering. If even half of these people ordered breakfast, it would be the biggest day in her restaurant's history. But beyond the business aspect, she was overwhelmed by the gesture itself, by the fact that her simple act of kindness had resonated so deeply with so many people. Chapter 9. A day like no other. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity unlike anything Maria had ever experienced in her diner. The bikers were patient and respectful, forming orderly lines and waiting their turns without complaint. Many of them had traveled significant distances, some from as far as Nevada and Arizona, specifically to eat at Santos Family Diner and show their support for Maria's kindness. Maria worked with an energy and efficiency she hadn't felt in years, her small kitchen producing plate after plate of her authentic Mexican-American cuisine. The griddle sizzled constantly with eggs, bacon, and hash browns, while pots of beans and rice simmered on every available burner. The coffee maker ran continuously, and Maria found herself grateful for every piece of equipment that she had been too proud to replace, despite its age. The bikers were not just customers. They were ambassadors for their community, sharing stories about their charitable work, their families, and their respect for small business owners like Maria. Many of them left tips that were larger than the cost of their meals, and several pressed business cards into her hand with offers of help for anything she might need in the future. Word of the gathering had spread beyond the motorcycle community, and local news crews began arriving to document the extraordinary scene. The sight of 100 motorcycles lined up outside a small diner was visually striking, but the real story was the human connection that had brought them all together. Reporters interviewed both Maria and the bikers, capturing the essence of a community that valued loyalty, generosity, and mutual support. By noon, Maria had served more meals than she typically served in a week. Her cash register, usually barely touched, was full to overflowing. But more importantly, her heart was full as well. The loneliness and despair that had been her constant companions for months had been replaced by a sense of connection and hope that she had almost forgotten was possible. Chapter 10. Building Lasting Bonds. As the day progressed, it became clear that this was more than just a one-time show of support. Many of the bikers made plans to return regularly, treating Santos Family Diner as a regular stop on their routes through Southern California. Some lived locally and promised to become regular customers, while others planned to make the diner a destination for future rides and gatherings. Jake and several other club leaders approached Maria with a more formal proposal. They wanted to help her renovate and modernize the diner, offering both financial support and volunteer labor from club members who worked in construction, electrical, and other relevant trades. The offer was made without strings or expectations, simply a desire to ensure that someone who had shown such kindness to their community would have the resources to continue serving others. Maria was initially overwhelmed by the generosity, unsure how to accept such substantial help from people she had only just met. But as she talked with the bikers throughout the day, she began to understand that this was how their community operated. They took care of their own, and by feeding 12 hungry men the night before, she had become part of their extended family. The practical benefits were immediate and substantial. The money from the day's sales was enough to pay her overdue bills and restock her kitchen with quality ingredients. But the long-term impact was even more significant. The diner now had a steady base of customers who would spread the word about Maria's cooking and hospitality throughout their extensive networks. More importantly, Maria had gained something she hadn't realized she was missing, a sense of community and belonging. The isolation and struggle that had characterized her recent years were replaced by the knowledge that she was part of something larger, a network of people who valued the same principles of kindness and mutual support that had guided her throughout her life. Chapter 11. A New Chapter. In the weeks that followed, Santos Family Diner was transformed from a struggling restaurant into a thriving community gathering place. The motorcycle clubs made good on their promises, with members stopping by regularly for meals and bringing friends and family members who were curious about the place that had inspired such loyalty and devotion. The renovations began within a month, with volunteer crews working evenings and weekends to update the kitchen equipment, repair the flickering lights, and give the dining room a fresh coat of paint. The work was done with the same attention to detail and pride that characterized everything the motorcycle community undertook, and the result was a diner that maintained its authentic character while functioning more efficiently and attractively. Maria found herself cooking for a diverse clientele that included not only bikers but also local families, truckers, and travelers who had heard about the restaurant through word of mouth and media coverage. The story of her kindness had resonated far beyond the motorcycle community, inspiring people who valued authentic generosity and human connection. The financial transformation was remarkable, but the personal transformation was even more significant. Maria's confidence returned as she saw her restaurant filled with satisfied customers who appreciated both her cooking and her character. The stress and worry that had dominated her thoughts for months were replaced by excitement about the future and gratitude for the unexpected turn her life had taken. As she looked around her bustling diner one evening, watching bikers share tables with families and seeing the genuine friendships that had developed between people from very different backgrounds, Maria reflected on the lesson she had learned. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply offer what you have to those who need it, trusting that kindness has a way of multiplying and returning when you least expect it, but most need it. The 12 hungry bikers who had changed her life had taught her that generosity is never wasted, that community can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the people who look the most intimidating are actually the ones with the biggest hearts and the strongest sense of loyalty and honor.